because we come from communities where the truth doesn't always reach the headlines, but it lives in what we face every day. This is Changing Trends and Times, bringing clarity and context to the issues shaping our lives right now. No spin, no distractions, just real talk rooted in real impact. Now, are you ready to lean in and bring your voices into the conversation? Then, allow me to introduce to you a man committed to asking the questions that matter and breaking it down so we all understand. Your host, Charles King.
In 1868, a man named John Willis Menard stood on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, and the House refused to let him speak. He had won his election. He had been duly chosen by the voters of Louisiana's 2nd Congressional District. He had traveled to Washington, taken his place, and prepared to serve. But the House debated whether he even had the right to be there. And in the end, they decided he didn't. He was denied his seat. His election was thrown out. His voice was silenced before a single word left his mouth. And here is what history recorded. John Willis Menard became the first African American to address Congress, even if Congress refused to truly listen. That is the story of Reconstruction in one moment. That is the story we are telling today. Welcome back to Left, Right, and Black, the political parties and the fight for representation. I'm your host, and this is episode 2, Reconstruction Unfinished. Last episode, we laid the foundation. We talked about where Black political identity was born not in comfort, not in invitation, but in the fire of a nation that had written us out of its foundation documents and then had the audacity to call itself the land of the free. We talked about how Black Americans from the very beginning understood that the ballot was not a privilege, it was survival. It was power. It was the difference between being governed and being crushed. Today, we go into the room where the promise was almost kept. Reconstruction in 1865 to 1877 is the period that American classrooms treat like a footnote and American politicians treat like it never happened. But let me tell you what it actually was. It was the closest this country has ever come to living up to its own creed. For approximately 12 years, Black men across the South voted in numbers that would not be seen again for nearly a century. More than 2,000 Black men held elected office during Reconstruction, from local sheriffs to state legislators to United States senators. Hiram Revels and Blanche Bruce sat in the United States Senate. Joseph Ramey became the first Black man to serve in the House. Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback became the first Black governor in American history, even if only for 35 days. These were not men given opportunity. These were men who seized it with their votes, their organizing, with their defiant, beautiful insistence that the Constitution applied to them too. And the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, the party of the radical Republicans who pushed through the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, was, in that moment, the vehicle through which Black political power moved. Understand the context. Understand the moment. The party that fought to preserve Black freedom and the party that fought to destroy it were not yet the parties we know today. We'll get into that realignment, but right now, stay in 1865. Stay in the moment when the Constitution was amended, when the Freedoms Bureau was established, when federal troops stood in southern states to enforce the law of the land, when Black men walked to polling places, for the first time and changed the face of American democracy. And then, stay with me, stay in that room when they decided it wasn't worth protecting anymore. Because that is where this story turns. That is where the betrayal lives. The compromise of 1877, a backroom deal to resolve a disputed presidential election. Rutherford B. Hayes gets the White House, and in return, federal troops leave the South. The government that had been the last line of defense between Black citizens and white terror simply left. The Freedmen's Bureau was gutted. The enforcement of the 14th and 15th Amendments collapsed. And what rushed in to fill the vacuum was not just racism, it was organized, legislative, militarized white supremacy. Poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, the Ku Klux Klan riding through towns not as criminals, but as the effective law of the land. Reconstruction didn't fall because Black people were not ready. Reconstruction ended because white political ambition decided Black freedom was negotiable. And that decision, that compromise, echoes in every political conversation about Black America to this very day. So today, we're going to sit in that history. We're going to name the people who built something extraordinary during those 12 years. We're going to name the people who tore it down. We're going to examine which party did what, why they did it, and what it meant for the political identity of Black America in this century that followed. Because you cannot understand what Black voters are today. You cannot understand the loyalty, the skepticism, the frustration, the strategy without understanding what was promised in 1865 and taken away by 1877. This is not just the past. This is the blueprint. Let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Changing Trends and Times. I'm your host, Charles King, and this is part 2 of our series, Left, Right, and Black, the political parties and the fight for representation. Last week's episode was Before the Party Switched. This episode is Reconstruction Unfinished. So I want to take you guys through this whole entire process because this is what's important. The importance to this docuseries is to give you guys the understanding as to what happened before, how things transpired to get us to this point, but to know that today is a revisited blueprint and a revisited historical context of doing now what happened then. So as we get into this, so let me just tell you, let's talk about the promise first. And so to give you some context on this, let's go back again as I started. On February 25th of 1870, a man walked into the United States Senate chamber and changed the meaning of American democracy forever. That person was Hiram Rhodes Revels, and he was a minister, a former Union Army chaplain, a man who had spent the war recruiting Black soldiers and building schools for freed people in Missouri. He took the oath of office. He sat down in the seat once occupied by Jefferson Davis. And everybody knows that Jefferson Davis at this time, when we had the Confederacy, was the president of the Confederacy. So the symbolism was almost too large for any single moment to contain. The chamber that bent itself to the will of enslavers for generations now held in the person of this quiet, composed preacher from Mississippi, the living proof that something had genuinely shifted in the Republic. In the galleries above, Black men and women pressed forward to see on the floor. Some senators refused to look. Outside the capital, the nation had just survived the bloodiest war in its history, was attempting something it had never seriously tried before, to build a democracy that actually included everyone. For one brief, radiant decade, the years historians call Reconstruction, it almost worked. The promise was real, the amendments were law, Black men voted, held office, built schools, and governed, and then through a campaign of terror, political betrayal, and willful abandonment, the country unmade what it had made. The consequences have never fully been repaired. So what we're talking about now is the first Black senator, the first one to ever be sworn in here in the United States, was the senator from Mississippi, and that was Hiram Rhodes Rebels. And so what this episode here, which is episode 2, so I go back, episode 1 was before the parties switch. This episode is the unfinished. Reconstruction is unfinished. So what actually transpired is when we look at how political parties were set up, and originally, as we stated in last week's episode, you guys had the understanding of knowing that Black representation was a part of the Republican Party. And it was strong, it led, the country was great. This is all after the Civil War. After the Civil War, the power in the South was controlled and held by Black politicians. The country ran smooth for that whole decade. There's this 10-year period that ended in 1877 with a revolt. So let me give you this overview before we get into the story. The revolt is what we know today as the same thing that transpired on January 6th when they had the insurrection, as it was called. This happened at this time because, the representation of Black people was what it was. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were established. Everything was what it was supposed to be. Everybody was working towards the freedom of everybody, and we just had what was being built as a United States that was for the people, by the people. And so what transpired is, as we get later into the ending of this decade, is the white revolt started from the politicians that were inside the Capitol. Sounds familiar, right? January 6th. The exact same thing. The exact same thing. Except for at that time, it was the Democrats. This time, it's the Republicans. And so, just so we understand, in episode 1, we told you about the party switching. The Democrats / Dixiecrats went Republican. The Republicans went Democrat. Right. And so what happened is, as we got into the civil rights era coming forward, most Black people here in the country went Democrat. Okay, not for the loyalty part, because as we stated in the first episode, there was still nothing to solidify what would actually happen, as to how politics were going, because when it came down to the political parties, our rights as Black people were was up for negotiation. And so when it was up for negotiation, it's saying this, that for being organized, having the country running smoothly, and having Black majorities in the majority of southern states, is not what the white revolt wanted. And this was due to those with the uprising that followed Jefferson Davis in saying that black people had no rights, they're not citizens, and all of this other madness. Now, this led to real serious consequences because you have people being killed. That is, the black politicians being dragged, from after congressional meetings, being drugged, being hanged, just being killed. You got people interrupting meetings in the Congress, causing violence, just being violent. And so you get this today. What I'm actually trying to get you guys to understand is this, is I'm not telling you what to do or how to do it. I'm giving you the historical context because I want you to understand that when we talk about party affiliation, you have to understand who is got your best interest. And as you look at this, as we went from episode 1 to episode 2, is that no party is going to have your loyalty or going to have your back to make this society much better for you, because the terrorism is continuing. Just like that terrorism back then, that same terrorism is today. The same thing. So as we get into the story, I want to start with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, okay? Because this was truly, so let you know, we were like 10 years close. 10 years. To where we went from 1865 to not 1875, but actually the revolt started in 1877. So we had 10 years where the country was running smooth, it was building, everything was fine. Now, just remember this as I go through this, is you guys won't believe this, but it's true. The state house in South Carolina was a black majority. It was a black majority. Now we're going back to where we had the original 13 colonies, and this is where the strength of America was building, but they refused to let this continue because it was all about the violence, that we're seeing again today. So when I talk about the 13th Amendment, it was ratified in December of 1865 to abolish slavery throughout the United States, not merely in the rebellious states as Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had done, but everywhere, constitutionally, permanently. 4 million people were legally free in an instant. But freedom without rights is merely a different kind of confinement, and the architects of Reconstruction knew it. So now, when we talk about these architects, we're talking about freedom for each and every individual that is written into the Constitution. It shows this. And I know a lot of people will say, well, it says that today. Well, I want you to know that what has happened is the amendments as they added to these different amendments, as they've abolished them and ratified them, have changed them over a period of time where the meaning is just not the same. It is not the same because they're trying. What's basically happening is right before our very eyes in the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives. They're actually rewriting history for these last 10 to 15 years, right in front of our eyes, right under our noses, that are changing the rights for each and every individual in this country if you are not white. If you are not white. Now, I want you to think about that and ask yourself, why would this happen? This is the purpose of this story, is because what people failed to understand, or what people did not know, is that the Black majority throughout this country, especially in the South, was one that was strong and was thriving. And what's true today, as what we have seen in past, especially during the Obama times when he ran for office, is that when it comes down to it, we're seeing a Black representation at the polls. And so when they did the rebellion, that changed all of that. So when we talk about the 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment was ratified in 1868. It was arguably the most transformative legal document in American history after the Constitution itself. It extended birthright citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States, guaranteed equal protection of the laws, and prohibited states from abridging the privileges of citizenship without due process. For the first time, the federal government was constitutionally empowered, obligated even to protect individual rights against state-level violations. The old antebellum compact, in which states held near total sovereignty over the lives of people within their borders, was permanently rewritten. So you are not going to treat people that are not white any different than you do white people, according to the amendment to the 14th according to the 14th Amendment, and the way it was enacted and it was written. And it was written to take this as a broad stroke throughout the entire nation. And so these laws were meant to protect each and every citizen. Now, we know that before slavery was abolished, okay, we know that what was happening then was the fact that people were actually trying to do whatever they wanted to do with Black people, because they felt like it was okay to do whatever it is to try to kill people, still being violent for no reason, but they just want to be violent. They have to be violent. They're still violent. Nothing has changed when it comes to that. The 15th Amendment was ratified March of 1870. It completed the constitutional revolution. No citizen could be denied the right to vote on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Together, the three Reconstruction amendments represented what historians have rightly called a second founding, a reimagining of the American Republic, more sweeping in its ambitions more than anything the framers had attempted. Frederick Douglass, who had spent his life fighting for these principles, called the 15th Amendment the most important event that has occurred since the nation came into life. So now, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments complete what supposedly is the most complete, most sweeping documentation of what's going to happen here in this country for the protections of all to be for the people and by the people. So voting rights are already here. They're already here. Black people are voting. Black people are leading the Republican Party. The Republican Party. And we get this kind of change now that's telling us that now you can't vote. Now you can't vote. Now, all this gerrymandering that's happening today, all of this is happening because in trying to go back to a totally white South, along with the Supreme Court's help, is stripping rights from people right now. So remember, when we talked about rights in the 14th Amendment, this is what they're actually changing. So you guys should ask yourself the question, why are they changing this? And the reason I say, in my opinion, that this is being changed is because the competition is too fierce, it's too steep, and it's too much for them to compete with. So just like back then in 1877, where they did the overthrow of the government and did this radicalness where everything was just totally changed, and the threats of killing people and hanging people and all of these things transpired, took place, and are real. They did happen. But what are people going to do about it? What are people going to do about it? See, the purpose of this docuseries is telling you, and it's showing you as we go through this, that what's happening now is old. And so for those that are Black, stop it with the thing of, oh, well, they own everything. That is not true. But the actual radicalness of taking over the government at that time is a continuous trend and an evolution of putting in white supremacy to continue to build this country with. Now, if people fought back then for their rights and got us up to this point, to the 20th century, where the Civil Rights Act that was finally passed in 1965, 1966, well, 64 and 65, there's a reason for that happening, because that's pushing back on that same radicalness. And so what you're looking at now is because people felt like, that happened then, that can't happen now. That's taking too much for granted. That's giving too many people the benefit of the doubt when they don't deserve it. So when what I'm going to get to now is I want to talk about the Black political power and what it actually looked like. Because what many people don't believe and have not actually taken the time to look at is that Black power centered in Mississippi. Mississippi led the power movement of Black representation throughout the South and in Washington, D.C. It didn't just happen by chance. The people got out and voted for these people. These people actually did their jobs. So there shouldn't be too many more Mississippi jokes, because what we should be thinking about as the state that actually led this entire country with Black people as the number of Black people in a state, it was Mississippi for a long time. But that slowly changed and gradually changed to many other places because people started to migrate away because there was nothing that gave them the opportunity to fight for what was theirs, and you just had to do what was needed to be done. So we've got to do a whole lot of work, people. So Reconstruction governments were not the corrupt carnival of incompetence that white supremacist historians spent the better part of the century portraying them to be. They were, by almost any honest accounting, among the more progressive and productive state governments the South had ever seen. And their most consequential achievement was the one that threatened the old order. Most directly, they built public schools. So when we go back and we talk about this again, all of these states had the best public education systems. They were built for all. There was thriving economic progressions in all of these cities. And, you know, of course, also at this time, you've got being built, major black cities being built all around the country with their own economic gaps, where they're doing their things. They're actually building in their communities. The communities are thriving. Communities are thriving. It's the terrorism that took place that's changed the face of this country, rewriting history and blacking out history like it's nobody's business, and nobody is knowing the actual truth as to why these things happened. And they happened because when all of these cities, especially the ones in the South, where progression was doing what it was supposed to do, these people were upset and did not want that. Just like now, they do not want that. Where's the attack? On education. The attack is on education. And we have to do a better job, people. We've got to do a better job for our children and for the younger people coming up, because they need to know stories about what we're talking about today and why it's important for them to let their voices be heard, and they get the opportunity to do all the things that they need to do to make things right going forward. Before the Civil War, most Southern states made it a crime to teach an enslaved person to read. Public education for poor whites was spotty and underfunded. For Black people, it was essentially non-existent. The Reconstruction governments changed that. South Carolina's 1868 constitutional education for all children, regardless of race, similar provisions appeared in Reconstruction constitutions across the former Confederacy. By the early 1870s, Black literacy rates were climbing steeply in states where they had been effectively zero a decade before. So again, who are the smart people? Black people. Black people. We deserve more credit than we're giving ourselves, but we also deserve to get what is deserved for us. This ain't about, oh, well, we got to go and we got to overthrow the government. No, ain't nobody doing that foolishness. No, we're not talking about that kind of foolishness. But what we're talking about is making what's necessary happen for us as what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. Now, I'm not talking about all that craziness where you got these people that's running around here committing all this violence. They want to do violence because they want to do harm. I'm not talking about doing harm. What I'm talking about is unity. I'm talking about unity. If our forefathers back in the days could do what they did in the 1800s and establish this foundation for this very country that was stolen like everything else, if they can do that then, we can do that now. That's the whole premise of this. That's the whole premise. And to stop supporting a Republican Party or a Democratic Party because they mean us no good. They're not going to do the job for you. They are always quick to tell you, any of the politicians, don't care if they're Black or white or Hispanic or Asian or whomever, they will tell you when you're Black that they have to be a representative for all people. But when all these other ethnicities run to them for some help and some things that they need, they enact bills for them. They do it without any sight. We've got to start doing for us. And I said this in episode 1. We need to build our own political party. Let's do the Black Party and let's call it a day. The political record was equally striking between 1869 and 1877. More than 1,500 Black men held public office across the South as state legislators, sheriffs, judges, city councilmen, school board members, and members of Congress. Mississippi sent 2 Black men to the U.S. Senate, Hiram Rebels and later Blanche Kelso Bruce. South Carolina state legislator had a Black majority. These men passed civil rights legislation, reformed tax systems to fund public services, rebuilt war-damaged infrastructure, and governed with a seriousness of purpose that belied every caricature their enemies constructed of them. Now, the country is on its way to being built and being a stronghold, especially from the educational system, is led by Black members of the U.S. Senate and the House and state legislators. This is what's happening. This is what's transpiring. But being upset, being mad at the infrastructures of doing the right thing is what caused this overthrow of the government and changing a system that was working to what we got today. And what is that? That's thievery. It does not matter where it goes, that taking something that belongs to somebody else and trying to claim it as your own, trying to control people in their countries, when that is definitely not the way to go. So now that we're in the 21st century and that same playbook is still being enacted, what are Black people going to do? Because I'm saying to you again and again and again, why support a Republican Party or a Democratic Party? None of those people are doing whatever is necessary to benefit you as a Black person and your community. None of them. So now we're getting to the counter-revolution and what actually transpired. That is, the Ku Klux Klan was founded in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1865, almost as soon as the war ended, by former Confederate officers who understood with perfect clarity that the political enfranchisement of Black Americans posed an existent threat to white supremacist social order. White supremacist social order, which is what we have today inside the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate in Washington, D.C. White supremacists. These are their practices today. They're following the same old playbook from 1865. And yet and still, the people that are being voted into the House and the Senate today are refusing. This even includes the people that you vote for as president are refusing to change these things from a constitutional perspective. Now, they've went time and time again in changing parts of the Constitution and amending and ratifying them and just changing them decade after decade after decade after decade. But to revert back and to make things right is not what it's not what these folk that are in politics today are trying to do. So what they're doing is they're telling you that no, you don't have rights. We're refusing to give you rights. And you have to be a free person and a citizen of this country in order to get those, which we are. So we've got to do something about this. So as we get to, by the late 1860s, as the Klan spread across the South as a parliamentary terror network, conducting systemic campaigns of murder, arson, rape, and mutilation against Black voters, Black office holders, white Republican allies, and anyone else who participated in the Reconstruction political project. Their targets were chosen with surgical intent. They killed teachers who ran from freedmen schools, shot legislators on the way home from session, and dragged men from their homes in the middle of the night for the crime of having voted. Now, as horrible as this is, and we know what this is about, what could possibly keep so many people that's running this system to falter in this way? Who else was supporting this revolt to make this happen? Because, when you think about it, and for some of us as being natural and being a part of the world and the earth from beginning up to that point, I mean, the rule was the rule. And the way things ran was all about populating the earth and making it what it was supposed to be. Now, from the inception and spreading out across this entire world, I do not recall, and there's nothing that will ever tell you that the people that migrated from Africa around this world to populate all of these countries, these cities, and these states, that they were ever about violence and running around just killing people, pillaging and stealing land and whatever have you. It wasn't about that. It was about teaching. This was natural. This was natural for Black people to be that kind of person, that kind of people, loving people. And that's what they were doing. But to let it be known, and the way things are told today from historical context, which we know is a lie, is that Black people were always stupid. They couldn't read. They had no literacy rate. They didn't know what it was to even think about education. And I'm telling you right here that that's a lie. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can go and find it out yourself. I want to put this information out to you because I want you guys to start using your own mind and thinking that you do not have to be a loyalist to any political party, because none of those parties are going to do what's right by you. None of them are. So the Klan was only the most visible instrument of the counter-revolution. In Louisiana, the White League, a parliamentary organization affiliated openly with the Democratic Party, conducted what can only be called an insurrection in 1874. An insurrection in 1874, attacking the integrated New Orleans Metropolitan Police and briefly seizing control of the state government. In South Carolina, the Red Shirts rode openly through Black communities in the run-up to the 1876 elections, intimidating voters, breaking up Republican meetings, and making it clear that any Black man who attempted to vote did so at the risk of his life. In the Colfax Massacre in 1873, more than 100 Black men were killed in Grant Parish, Louisiana, many of them after they had already surrendered, in what the historian Eric Foner has called the bloodiest single instance of racial carnage in Reconstruction era. So again, why the hatred towards Black people? Black people have done nothing but done the right thing, but the hatred for Black people is so strong. And so I'm putting that out there because I need you to answer that question. Ask yourself the question, why? It's not about anything that we did. It's about the integrity and what it took to make things work for everybody. So now we know that it's clear that what's wanted for everyone is not the way this country is going to go, and it's not what they're going to do. So now, as we get to the deal, the election of 1876 was contested as any in American history. Democrat Samuel Tilden won the popular vote by roughly 250,000 ballots over Republican Rutherford Hayes. But the electoral vote was thrown into chaos by disputed returns in Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, precisely in 3 remaining southern states where federal troops still protected Republican governments and Black voters. Does that sound like the Donald Trump election where he wanted Mike Pence to throw the election in chaos? The exact same thing. The exact same thing. You see, they pulled that off then. They didn't this past time. But there's a continued push to destroy what the Constitution has in place to break the country. Now, as we look at what's happening here in the country today, we can either allow that or we can do our part to hold up our end for our due diligence as to how we want to protect those that are rightfully doing the right thing under the Constitution. The question is, can we unite and make this happen? Because that's the most important thing that we could ever do. That is the most important thing. So, my question, are we going to do that or are we not? Let's speak up. Let's do what we got to do. Let's do what we got to do. Because you see, those very same states, remember, it says Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. Now, we're talking about disputed returns. Florida is always in that situation. Louisiana has not been caught doing any of those things today, but it takes part in many different ways of voter suppression. South Carolina is doing the same thing with voter suppression after all these years of being represented by those that were for the people. So I think you guys should ask yourself the question, why are we looking at the same thing here in the 21st century that took place back in the 19th century? 3 centuries apart, and we got the same playbook. The exact same playbook. So the consequences of Reconstruction, the Reconstruction's defeat did not unfold over years. They cascaded over generations. Within 2 decades of 1877, virtually every southern state had erected a comprehensive architecture of disenfranchisement. Poll taxes, literacy tests administered within deliberate arbitrariness, grandfather clauses, white primaries, and undergirding all of it, the ever-represented threat of violent retribution for any Black man or woman bold enough to try Mississippi, which had sent 2 Black senators to Washington during Reconstruction, did not send another Black congressman until 1986. South Carolina's Black majority legislature was supplanted by a government that stripped Black citizens of virtually every political right they had won. Those rights would not be substantially restored for nearly a century. The cultural and intellectual work of burying Reconstruction's actual history was almost as systematic as its political dismantling. The lost cause mythology promoted by ex-Confederate historians, popularized by novels like The Klansman, which became the film Birth of a Nation, and eventually encoded into the curricula of Southern public schools, recast Reconstruction governments as corrupt, incompetent, and illegitimate, and portrayed white parliamentary violence as heroic resistance. For most of the 20th century, this was simply what school children were taught. The lie was so successful and so consequentially embedded in American political culture that its full unraveling is still incomplete. Again, we're going off this playbook, what's happening today. And W.E.B. Du Bois, his writing in his monumental 1935 work, Black Reconstruction in America, tried to tell the true story against this tide of deliberate falsification. The slave went free, he wrote, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery. The phrase has the quality of an epitaph, but Du Bois did not intend it as one. He intended it as a charge, a demand that the nation look honestly at what it had done and what it had refused to do. So we've got to do better, all of us. We've got to do better because, for people to try to take away rights of citizens, like what's happening today, this is not real. This is not something that any of us should put up with. This is not what any of us should put up with. And so, and just getting another snapshot of what happened during Reconstruction and how close we came to actually being a real democracy was something that it's clear that that white terrorists from back in 1867, 1865, those terrorists is what has changed this country right now today. And the uprising of that same terrorism is happening again today. But the thing that makes it even harsher than what it is the fact that all of this is coming from inside the federal government. The actual federal government itself is the organization. That's the organization that's doing this. It's true. It's the truth. And if anyone can debate that, please tell me about it, because I definitely want to know. Because this is nonsensical. This is nonsensical. And now we're on a stretch right now that actually is more harmful for all of us going forward. This is not something that any of us want to be a part of. And I will tell you this. I think anybody that's serious about making this right need to think about what is the right thing to do and why they should be doing it. Because there are shows like this, and there's many others that's happening right now in the country where we're talking about this that's taking place, but we're all coming at it from many, many different angles. I would say no one is more right than the other, but I do think shining the light means more than anything for each of us. I want to say to you, I appreciate, what's happening today, but we've got to just do better, ladies and gentlemen. We got to do better, because We're much better than this. And I have to say that for me, being a black man, I could be no prouder than who I am, what I stand for, what I believe, because nothing or no one can change my mind. And until we actually unify and purge all of this darkness out of this system that's being used today, it's going to continue. You can't have a clean, clear system when you have this kind of violence, this kind of terrorists, this kind of short-sightedness in thought, and this of supremacy beliefs that everything is about them and the violence. Why so violent? Why so violent? You be violent and then you want to throw the violence on someone else. Let me do my closing monologue here. Here's what I need you to hold on to as we close today. Reconstruction was not an experiment that failed. It was a revolution that was suppressed. There's a difference, and that difference matters more than almost anything else in understanding Black political history. When something fails, you look inward. You ask, what was wrong with the idea? What was wrong with the people? What was wrong with the execution? But when something is suppressed, when it is working, when it's producing results, when Black men are winning elections and building schools and writing legislation and citing in Congress, and it is stopped by organized violence, political betrayal, and federal abandonment, that is not failure. That is sabotage. And America has never fully reckoned with that. We were taught, if we were taught anything at all, that Reconstruction was a messy, chaotic period of Northern overreach that eventually sorted itself out. What the framing leaves out is the terror, the massacres of Colfax, Louisiana, the Ellington riot, the Hamburg massacre, the systemic state-sponsored destruction of Black political organizing across the South. What it leaves out is that the men and women who built Black political power during those 12 years didn't give up. They were forced out at gunpoint through legislation designed to make their citizenship meaningless on paper and impossible in practice. The 14th Amendment still on the books. The 15th Amendment still on the books, both of them unenforced for nearly a century. That is not history moving slowly. That is history being deliberately held back. And here is why this matters for today. Because someone is going to ask, why do you keep going back to the past? And my answer is this: because the past is not over. The arguments being made today about voter ID laws, about gerrymandering, about who gets to run and who gets counted, these are not new arguments. They are old arguments in new language. The machinery that dismantled Reconstruction did not disappear. It evolved. It found new forms, new justifications, new legal frameworks, and understanding Reconstruction is the key to recognizing those forms when you see them. Here's the other thing I want you to carry with you. During Reconstruction, Black Americans, less than a generation removed from legal enslavement, many of them unable to read because it had been illegal to teach them, built political infrastructure with extraordinary speed, sophistication, and purpose. They organized, they registered, they ran, they won, they governed in 12 years with every possible obstacle in front of them. They demonstrated that Black political participation was not only possible, it was transformative. That capacity never left. It was suppressed for 90 years by law, by terror, and by deliberate political exclusion. And then in 1965, the Voting Rights Act restored what the 15th Amendment had promised in 1870. And Black voters once again showed up, showed out, and changed the direction of this country. That is the through line. That is the story from Reconstruction to redemption to the Civil Rights Movement to today. The fight has always been the same fight: the ballot, the seat at the table, the right to be counted as a full citizen of the country that was built on our labor and our blood. So as we move forward in this series, as we walk about how the party shifted, how Black voters made strategic decisions and what drove those decisions, how the political landscape of today was shaped by every compromise and every betrayal and every hard-won victory in between. I want you to remember the men and women of Reconstruction. Remember John Willis Menard standing before a Congress that refused to hear him. Remember Blanche Bruce sitting in the Senate with the dignity of a man who knew exactly what his presence meant. Remember the millions of ordinary Black voters who walked to polling places knowing that violence might follow them home and voted anyway. They were not waiting to be given their place in American democracy. They were claiming it. And that is what this show is about. Left, right, and Black. This is not just a political conversation. It is a reckoning. It is an accounting of what was promised and what was broken, what was rebuilt, and what is still being fought for. And we are just getting started. I'm your host. I want to thank you for being in this conversation. Share this episode, talk about it, argue about it, because the moment we stop talking about this history is the moment we let them convince us it doesn't matter. It matters. You matter. And we'll see you back in episode 3 next Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This has been Left, Right, and Black on the Changing Trends and Times podcast, which is part of the AMIBW Media Network. There are two moral universes is long, but it does not bend by itself. I want to thank you all for being here today. And I will tell you that as we go through this, and I want to see you guys again next Saturday as we get to episode 3 in this 4-part series. Please stay with us. Please follow. Please understand what's at stake. And remember, nobody should get your vote unless you think that they've earned it and they deserve it. No more political loyalty should be in place. I'm your host, Charles King. We'll see you guys next Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you all.